Good morning. Welcome to our webinar on behalf of the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. My name is David Saab. I'm the Mental Wellbeing Champion and Business Alliance Manager here at the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. By way of information, we're the fifth largest Chamber of Commerce, accredited Chamber of Commerce with the British Chambers. We're an NGO, we're separate from government, and we're the voice of business. Any who are listening, who are in the walls of the Thames Valley, shall we say, please consider checking out our Chamber of Commerce. It really is fantastic. By way of housekeeping, we invite questions. We've had a number of questions already from our audience upon registration, which we will attempt to answer, but we encourage you to enter any questions in the chat function, and I'll be keeping an eye on that and be helping our panel under the direction of Amantha to answer those. Any questions that we don't get to during this webinar, we will answer, so please bear with us. We have an hour. We're going to keep this fairly punchy, so, but please do ask questions as we go through the session. After the session, we will distribute a guest list. So I know the temptation sometimes is to put your company details, those of you who are consultants and things, into the chat function. Perhaps I invite you, unless you really feel you need to refrain from that and keep the chat function for questions. That way it makes my life easier. And then post-event, when you have the guest list, you can reach out to whoever you'd like to. On a slightly more sensitive topic, I know that the menopause is a difficult topic and can trigger some emotional reactions, some concerns, and we want you to know, myself, Amantha, and the panel, that we're here for you. And please do reach out if this causes any areas of concern personally, or you'd just like to ask us some more questions. Please do reach out. My email is davidsaab@tvchamber.co.uk. On a slightly personal reflection, just for 20 seconds, my experience of the menopause, really personally, not much, but with my mum, who, when I was a teenager, she was a fantastic primary school teacher. Menopause hit, she got the shakes, started sweating profusely, and quit her job. And huge disruption for the family. And today, myself, Amantha, and the panel, if we can help you support even one woman as they go through this very difficult stage, then we'll be delighted. Without further ado, may I introduce our chair, Amantha King. Over to you, Amantha.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. So lovely to be here. I can't tell you just what privilege it is to be the chair for today's session. I'd like to welcome the panel that are going to ably help me with the conversation today: Andrew Pickett, Sharon Moffat, Sally Hanson, and Elaine Williams. I would like just to note and let everyone know we're so sorry to say that unfortunately Jess Buchan from Caudal Health is unfortunately unable to be with us. She's actually recovering from COVID, so I'm sending our best wishes to Jess. But we as a team are here to literally answer the question about menopause. So my name's Amantha King. I'm a strengths coach and I'm a menopause coach. I'm actually a perimenopausal woman. I'm 50 years old and I've been living with the perimenopause for 14 years. So I'm not even menopausal. I'll get into explaining what menopause actually is in a minute. But if we wonder why we're here on this webinar talking about, is menopause really a business issue? If I give you the statistics that 1.2 billion women around the world are either menopausal or postmenopausal, and 47 million women will become menopausal in one of those three stages every year. When we think about what we're doing here in the UK, the fact that we actually now have a menopause task force directly talking to government with MPs involved who are actually signposting that on average we have 1.8 billion loss in our economy due to menopause. It's just staggering, and that we lose something like 14 million working days every year due to women stepping away from work because of menopausal symptoms. So I've been charged with literally 5 minutes to tell you about the menopause, so please bear with me. I mean, I go into businesses and spend 4 or 5 hours talking about this, but let's get into it. Let's talk about the menopause. So what we know about the menopause is it's a biological, psychological, and social experience. It's not a disease, it's not a condition, it's a natural process that every single woman on the planet will go through, whether they have symptoms or not. Now, this is just akin to really having diabetes. You know, diabetes is about having a deficiency in insulin, a hormone. Menopause is exactly the same. So I think the first thing is that we really talk about what is the menopause, and the best place to start is the definition of it. Menopause is relating to sexual hormones. Now, throughout this webinar, you'll hear us use the term woman or female. That doesn't exclude the transgender communities or those who are actually receiving female hormones. So this is a very inclusive webinar. So what we know is that there are 3 hormones. There is estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and those are largely our reproductive hormones. There are 3 stages to the menopause. We have the perimenopause. That's the first stage. The second stage is actually menopause, and that lasts just 1 day. And then we have postmenopause, which is the rest of a woman's life. So already we're using the terminology incorrectly in society. So going back to that first stage, perimenopause is when our hormones start to fluctuate erratically. And that erratic fluctuation is due to the fact that our ovaries, which hold our eggs, are actually declining in number. And so perimenopause can be a stage that can last, in my case, 14 years. It may not be as long for some women. And like I say, it can be symptomatic or without symptoms. What happens after that perimenopause stage is coming to an end is our periods start to decline. We get fewer periods, menstrual cycles. And what will happen is eventually 1 whole year will pass where a woman doesn't actually have her periods. And that is when she is classed as menopausal. And we're only menopausal for 1 day, because a day later we're classed as postmenopausal. And in exactly the same way as the perimenopause, the postmenopausal phase can be a very elongated phase for women. And what I want us to really appreciate is that, like your unique fingerprints on your fingers, every woman's experience of menopause is unique to them. Now, women on average can experience upward of 8 symptoms relating to menopause. That's those 3 stages. And there are over 40 symptoms. Sadly, the average woman, it may take 14 months for her to actually realise that she is in menopause. And it will take another 12 months if she even gets HRT, hormone replacement therapy, to actually start to feel anywhere near like her old self. And so it's really important that we understand that HRT, hormone replacement therapy, is not a magic cure. For a lot of women, when they start HRT, it can be almost as worse as not having it, because the body has to adapt. So menopause is something that affects every woman. Now, there are hardly any organisations, if any, on the planet that don't have women in them. So if any businesses are wondering, how does this affect me? I think there's the proof. If you have women in your business, anyone really upward of the age of 40, they probably will be experiencing perimenopausal symptoms. So that's that first stage. So when we think about what we do as businesses, we obviously maybe might be thinking, well, surely that's the job of the healthcare system. The healthcare system needs to look after women. Sadly, so few women are able to access menopause specialists in their doctor's surgeries. Many will have to pay privately. And when we think about this, women between the ages of 50 to 64 are the largest demographic in the UK workforce. They have to be, because the retirement age is higher now. Women have earned their right to be at the top of their careers. And it's just an absolute travesty when we think that the average age for women to step away from work is in their 50s, which puts financial pressure on the economy. They're not contributing to their pensions. And what we know when we look at mental health is the suicide rate is the highest in women aged 50 to 54. So there is a direct correlation to how women are feeling in relation to how their hormones are performing. The divorce rate is the highest in the 50 age group. And we know that 65% of divorces are initiated by women. So men are being impacted too. Partners are being impacted. We talk about menopausal symptoms, but actually women and men are both struggling. Men who are with women who are having sleep problems will also be suffering with sleep deprivation. So we really do need to think as menopause as being something for everyone to be involved with, because by proxy, if you have women in your wider circle, either in your relationships, in your families, or in your workplace, then it affects you. And whatever we can do to help women stay in work is vital. The average woman will take up to 32 weeks during her career to navigate symptoms either attributed to the perimenopause and menopause, or women's health issues like very heavy periods. So I know that my colleagues on the panel are going to help me with this discussion. So what we're going to do now is we're going to really spend some time getting into the questions. So I'll invite my panelists to turn their cameras on so we can see their brilliant faces. And if you turn off your mutes, we're going to start getting into this. So welcome to this brilliant panel. Thank you so much for being here. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with the first question. So the first question is the menopause. So what? Why do we even need to talk about this? You know, with 1 million women leaving their jobs, what is the impact on business? Who'd like to start? I'll throw it open to the panel. Sally.
Yes, thank you, Amantha. Thank you, everybody, for coming on board. It's a subject that's very close to all of our hearts. So looking forward to this session. I put my hand up because actually I ended up leaving my job because of the menopause and the shame of the effect it had on me. There is a very fine line between mental health and the physical and mental effect that the menopause has. At the time, I was in a job I loved, a global job I really loved. I had the most amazing team. I was confident and happy, and I was rewarded well for doing a pretty good job. And then along came the normal physical symptoms of the hot flushes. So I became a human heater. And then from that, I went into a human freezer, which was, you know, we can cope with. But then the anxiety started to creep in little bit at a time. And I'm not an anxious person. I felt ashamed of the anxiety. I then got terrible nausea with it. And I thought, I wasn't sure what was going on. I knew something was wrong. I was working crazy hours because I was losing my confidence and therefore double, triple checking everything. And one of my team on a call once said to me when I was working in the US, she said, Sally, she said, have you been drinking? And obviously I'd sent a communication out that was clearly not my normal personality or way of communicating. By this stage, I was having panic attacks and not in a great place at all. So cut a long story short, I didn't tell any of my team. I should have done on reflection because they're the most wonderful, supportive team. I was ashamed. I was ashamed of being seen weak and not being seen able to do my job. What I ended up doing was I actually confided in one of the board members who was a female, and I told her that I thought things were going pretty wrong. And she said, for goodness sake, Sally, do not say a word, otherwise you just won't be thought of the same. And that's the response I got. By this stage, it was just coming up to Christmas. So when we finished for the Christmas break, I knew I was in trouble. So I worked till I think it was 2 in the morning in the office, clearing everything because I knew I was going to take some time off. So come the new year, I got some professional help. I actually booked myself into the Cardinal Clinic. I didn't tell anybody at work. I said I had a virus. I told my manager I was burnt out. And during that month, it was the best thing I ever did. At the time, I'd been through a terrible bereavement, but I knew I was coping with that. So everything was around mental health at the time. I went back to work after that month, and my manager, who was an interim at the time, treated me appallingly. She didn't think the same of me. And basically, about 2 months later, I left. this would never, ever, ever happen today. A, because of the mental health awareness, and also it would have been recognised, it probably was the menopause more so than the terrible grief, because I'd actually worked my way through the grief. So this wouldn't happen now, as I say, because of the mental wellbeing charters. But I have learned so many lessons that a company should never, ever put anyone through it. And there is no shame in it anymore. And we have to educate people more, because although it's better, there is a long, long way to go. So again, if anybody's struggling, my email is sally@shml.co.uk. I'd be more than happy to talk to you. So thank you for this opportunity. And this is why I'm so passionate about this not being a stigma anymore.
Thank you so much, Sally. On behalf of all women who are struggling with their hormones, I've just looked in the chat. People are saying you're telling their story. And, you know, that's the thing about menopause, isn't it? It's actually not a physical, visible disability. We can't see it. We can't tell who's menopausal. And so we need to dial down the judgment and open up the conversation, don't we? So thank you so much for sharing. That's just, there's so much power in you doing that. So thank you. Really.
Yes, I just wanted to say there probably was a link with mental health, but it was exacerbated massively by the menopause.
Absolutely, and the statistics bear that out. And
yeah.
so you know, there is a link. And maybe the thing is with menopause, we're just starting out where mental health was some sort of 5 to 7 years ago. So you're right, it's not going to be a sprint. There is probably a semi-marathon element to it, half marathon possibly. So this is great. So thank you so much. So can I open it up to the rest of the panel? Does anyone else have something to talk about? Andrew, coming to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, firstly, thank you for having me on the panel, because I am clearly very aware that I'm a man, right? And therefore will not myself go through the menopause. And what, I guess where I'm at with it and where I see it is, as I've been on a little bit of a journey with this over the past year through education, through kind of the workplace. And I was coming from a pretty uneducated place with it, as I think probably a lot of young men will, frankly. You know, when my mum wanted to talk to me about the menopause and was starting to go through the menopause when I was 18 or so, I was very much sat there going, la, 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 don't want to hear about this, not my problem, etc. And being quite immature about it, frankly. But to your point, and I think the thing that hits home to me from having, you know, spoken to you guys previously, and then, you know, also being a mental health advocate in my workplace, and a wider advocate, is around effectively, I don't want to work somewhere, and I don't want to be in a world where people feel like they have to quit their jobs for something that is totally uncontrollable to them, and, you know, natural. And I come at it from a place of obviously slightly different, that, you know, I have anxiety and depression, and I've had to take time off work for that. And so I kind of am pivoting into this as a topic from that angle, going, well, I know how I felt at that point. I felt, as, you know, Sally, as you were alluding to, right? I felt ashamed. I felt like, why can't I handle this? So all of those kind of similar feelings. And so as I've started to become a little bit more educated, hopefully, about menopause, I'm coming at it from that angle and thinking, well, why should anyone feel that way? I know how I felt at that point in time, and, you know, there's a combination of physical and emotional and mental symptoms of the menopause here. And so, as a man, and as, you know, sitting within a large organisation like PwC and as an employer, I just want to help, but I don't necessarily know. You know, I'm trying to confront, how do I help? You know, am I the right person? I'm a 29-year-old man, and I know we're going to cover some of these, you know, thoughts later in, you know, in the process. But I think, therefore, coming back to, I guess, the topic of, so what, with you know, with all the statistics that you gave them answer earlier, it's clearly a business issue. It's clearly a wider societal issue that we need to talk about, and hopefully with the, you know, the really positive trend of moving towards better empowerment of everyone, more diverse and inclusive workplaces, this is clearly something that we need to address better than is currently being addressed.
Absolutely right, Andrew. And, you know, this is in part what I want to celebrate and acknowledge, is actually men do feel uncomfortable talking about this, but actually I had a chance to think about this at the weekend, which is, does that surprise us? We know when we look at mental health as a backdrop and as an environment, men do struggle to talk about their mental health anyway. So why would we think they'd be able to talk about women's health and mental health issues? So I think we need to tread kindly together, actually, because a lot of women don't understand the menopause either. And I think in the workplace, sadly, we'd probably like to think that female managers would be supportive, but as in Sally's case that she talked about, it's not always a guarantee, because there is a stigma for women at the top of their careers that actually, if I acknowledge this, how does that affect me? Because the stigma is very, very real. So celebrate you being here, Andrew. We need more men, more male role models. They're coming through, but we need more of them. So let's do it together. So thank you so much. Coming back to the rest of the panel, Elaine, Sharon, anything to add here about, so what, business? Yeah. And
I think from so I come from the NHS, so we're one of the biggest employers in the UK, and the majority of our workforce are female, with a vast exodus of women leaving in their 50s, as you described. And so it's massively important that we educate the workforce. We need to keep these super skilled nurses and healthcare providers in work in order to deliver healthcare. Do you know what I mean? So we really have had a big focus on the menopause locally in the last few years. But yeah, massively important.
Absolutely. 77% of the NHS are women. Where would we have been without them during the pandemic? We need to appreciate this. And like we say, the bulk of that 77% are now in their 50s, that demographic that we're talking about. So thank you, Elaine. Coming to you, Sharon, last but not least at all.
Oh, thank you, Amantha. Yeah, I mean, is it our business? Is everyone's business? This is everyone's business, whether you're male, female, transgender, even teenagers. I saw a comment in there that teenagers don't have any empathy, and that's possibly true, but for me, this was never spoken about, right? And it's not until a woman in her 40s, I say that whispering, that it slaps you around the face, and then suddenly you want to start learning about it, but you feel very alone by that point. And hopefully with this, everything that's changing and this movement, which is so thankfully being pushed forwards, we are able to be a little bit more equipped when we get to that stage. And it reminds me, Amantha, of when, as a teenage girl, when you first start your periods, we didn't really know what it was. It was like, oh my gosh, whereas that's changing now. And I think it's the same thing. The more education you can have around topics, the more likely you are to show a level of empathy and understanding. People don't want someone to feel sorry for them. They don't want fixing. They just want somebody to understand that actually, these are the situations that I'm in, and I need some support around that, whatever those symptoms might be.
Absolutely, Sharon. And let's not diss teenagers too quickly, okay? Because just seen in the chat, and I know this myself with my daughter who's 16, she probably knows as much about the menopause as I do, because they're talking about it in schools now. So the more we talk and open up and maybe don't hold back with our children, that next generation is going to come through much quicker and stronger with this. So thank you, panel. Amazing. So we're going to get into the second question, if that's okay, which is, how do we retain women in business? So let's look at the fact that, okay, we've got these women. We now are going to build that awareness. We accept that. What on earth are we going to do to keep them? Anyone want to kick that one off? Because, creating the right environment is about having that conversation. So is there something we're already doing that we can draw on? What are your thoughts? Who'd like to kick us off?
Yeah, go on, Sally.
Go, Sally.
I think this has already been highlighted before. I think it's the flexibility, to give women the flexibility, as we've talked, like embarrassing situations, when a woman floods, another terrible physical symptom, give them the flexibility to be able to work from home or do whatever they need to do during that difficult time. Or if they're having a bad day, to just be able to say, look, I just need a bit of breathing space. I think it's the flexibility is so important once you've got the support.
Absolutely. Now, if we can just define what flooding is for people listening. So flooding is something that 1 in 20 women will present at their GP to have a diagnosis for. 3 out of 4 women will have very, very heavy periods. So their menstrual cycle is very heavy. It can involve having blood clots passing through. It's uncontrollable, and it can happen like that. No warning. I know Sharon has talked openly about this. You know, do we talk about flooding, or do we wrap it up in a fluffy type description? I don't think we need to do that. I mean, anyone else got anything to add? Sally, thank you. Sharon, you put your hand up. Elaine, either of you?
Yeah, I was going to talk about like creating a wider culture, so a wider culture around having compassionate conversations with people, so that, you know, the taboo issues around mental health, well-being, ability to come into work, sleepless nights, difficult relationships, all of those things that are around for everybody are able to be a conversation that people have in the workplace. You know, don't forget, the menopause can happen very early for some people, and then you've got a whole sense of loss, you know, grief, you know, there's a whole host of different issues to consider. So I think if we, you know, sort of widen it out more and think about that, a compassionate culture in work where, you know, no issue is taboo, then we can then maybe, you know, sort of reduce the stigma, create a workforce that is empowering for people, and makes people feel like they want to be in work. Do you know what I mean? And reduce that stigma and shame.
So important. Such a good point, Elaine. Thank you for mentioning that. It is about the essence and the DNA of an organisation, isn't it? You know, if we can have conversations about pregnancy and know the process, this is no different. So I'd like to come back to one of our experts here, Sharon, who a mental health first aid trainer. I mean, what's your insight? What can we be doing differently in order to have these conversations?
Yeah, thanks, Samantha. And I highlight what Elaine said, really. It's got to come down to culture, and it's got to come down to people almost having that trust that they can talk to somebody without feeling judged. And, you know, like we've heard it before, I'm sure all of us, and most of people that are listening, where somebody will go, I'll just get on with it. Or, you know, it's a bit like if someone's got a migraine and they go, oh yeah, whatever. When actually, if anyone's had a migraine, they will appreciate how hard that can be. And I think if you're allowing this trust within your employees, which I'd like to think people have, and you are empowering the leadership to have these compassionate conversations, or be willing to have them, and put their trust in their teams, that even if you have had a sleepless night and you need to take that time away because you've struggled at night, you're flooding, whatever it is, doesn't mean you're incapable of doing your job. It just means that you just need to step away for however long, a few hours, a few days, whatever. There has to be that level of trust there, and that can only happen through compassionate conversations, I believe.
That's exactly, Sharon. It's about the values in an organisation. It's about, I mean, trust is so important, isn't it? And feeling that there isn't that judgment, that actually you are valued. And really, when we think about the mechanics of those conversations, what, you know, let's state the bleeding obvious, shall we? You know, what can we be doing? What can we be doing better? How does a manager create that culture on a one-to-one? I mean, there we go, I've let that one out. You know, the one-to-ones, you know, do we just jump on a menopause conversation because we've noticed the absence, we've noticed someone's not on the top of their game, you know, they seem a bit disengaged, they're not really turning up for things? Or do we do something different? Andrew, have you got any thoughts, certainly in terms of how you might approach this?
Absolutely. And I think for me, the key thing is sensitively, right? It's for the person going through it, and for the, you know, the manager or the employer, it's a sensitive conversation and it needs to be handled in that way, right? So I think that for me, I mean, as with any conversation like that, right, it has to happen one-to-one. It would have to happen face-to-face, and not preferably even in, you know, today's working culture, right, not via Zoom, not via Teams or anything like that, right? Because it's a sensitive conversation. And I think you have to ask yourself as the manager, am I the right person to be having that conversation? Because you're not necessarily, right? And you might be. You can be a really strong advocate, but not everyone trusts in the same way. Not everyone clicks with everyone in the same way. And I think the key thing is around identification, that there is a conversation there to be had. And then from there, you can take the right steps to do that. I think I also want to just touch on really briefly, actually, the point around kind of empowerment and acceptability in the workplace, I think one thing that I wanted to share that we've done, which I think, and I take no credit for, Louise Hymers, who's on this from PwC as well, has done a fantastic job of this. Now in our kind of our employment system where people record absences and stuff, menopause is now one of the drop-down options. And I think that that's a really powerful move to kind of put this at the forefront of this is an acceptable thing to talk about, and if you need to take time away from work, you can, and it puts it at the forefront of the conversation so that hopefully you start to break down those barriers, right, around embarrassment and those kinds of things around the topic.
Yeah, that's so it's so important that actually that we do empower people. And I was just noticing the chat then, brilliant on the chat, everyone. It's so fantastic. There's so much coming in. It's about saying it's from the ground up. And whenever I'm working with organisations, the first thing I always say is, I'm not going to give you a standard webinar. What do people actually want? What do your people want? Do you even know what the demographic is in your organisation? And if I tell you, some of the largest healthcare organisations I'm working with, as much as 37% of their employees are affected by this conversation. Now that's 37% of menopausal women in their 50s. That hasn't even accounted for the perimenopausal women. So unless I think we know the numbers in our own organisations, if we want to give people some takeaway tools right now, I think it's about start with knowing your numbers. What are your numbers? The statistics tell us that, but work out the numbers. You'll have systems in your HR departments, and then seek to understand, what do people want? What are the big issues? Is it sleep? Is it concentration? Is it people feeling crushing anxiety? Where do they go to? How can your employee assistance program help? Is there an occupational health side of things? You know, there is best practice already out there. So this is not about reinventing the wheel. I want to reassure all of you not to feel that fear. Elaine.
I just wanted to share with you some of the work that we've done in the NHS over the past 5 years. In fact, obviously we had a big focus on the pandemic for 2 of them, but we started in 2017 thinking about the menopause, and at that point you weren't able to record on our internal system, our national system, being off work sick with the menopause. It's changed now, so I guess it's on everyone's agenda, but I have to say, I'm just going to share this sadly, that we did give out fans at the beginning because we didn't know what else to do, you know. And you're thinking about nurses wearing uniforms, so our community nurses and our inpatient nurses are wearing uniforms, you know, and need to be able to, you know, fan themselves. So we did give them out shamefully, but and they were well received, and we did do a questionnaire at that point, and I think our comms team said it was the biggest internal response to a questionnaire. So it's really emotive, people are really engaged in it, and since then we've done quite a lot of work. So we've done some education sessions that, you know, were open to everyone, that were literally just about providing some very basic education, and last October we launched a collaboration with a company called Peppy, and they run an app, so you buy a license for people, and it's 12 months worth of menopause support. So it's like one-to-one support group, information and all the rest of it, and I've got no affiliation with them, I'm just telling you this is what we did. And we're just trialing that for 12 months, and the anecdotal feedback so far is brilliant. I'm using it myself, which has been amazing, really supported me to go and have a conversation with the GP about HRT. So yeah, it's like, so we've done that now, and that costs us, it costs us as an organisation £150 per licence. Now we pay for counselling for people who have got some difficult issues to go through, and I think for 2 counselling sessions it's £150. So you've got £150 keeping women in work, and supporting women. So yeah, so we've been doing that.
Thank you, Elaine. I mean, it's phenomenal. I mean, just another, I love my stats, so I'm going to throw another one at you. If you lose a woman in your business, it will cost you £30,000. Think of all that amazing talent, that experience, that connection in your organisation. it really is a no-brainer that, you know, that we need to do more. And there are so many apps. Peppy is one. If you're looking for case studies, I mean, feel free to get in contact with me. I've got so many, but Santander is an amazing example. Channel 4 is an amazing example. These people have done the work, quite honestly. So, you know, the policies are there, the guidance is there. We're going to get into that in our next question, but something's better than nothing is the mantra, I would say. And if that starts with a lovely poll, if the Balance app, which is amazing, which is where women and partners can actually, there's so much resource on there, but you can actually document your period cycle, you can document your symptoms, you can actually connect the dots yourself so that you turn up at your double appointment. Always book a double appointment with your GP, by the way, if you're going to talk about menopause. And you can actually go through your symptoms. So there's a lot that we can do to signpost to people. It's not about us having all the solutions, but it definitely is us about being part of the solution. So before we move to our next question, Andrew, I think did you have your hand up? Yeah. And Sally.
Because conscious of the chat's kind of really going wild with kind of practical solutions, and just I wanted to circle back briefly on the topic of kind of building from the ground up. And what people can do. So what we've done is we've started a kind of, on our intranet, a kind of community page on it. And if anyone out there is worried, oh, this isn't going to get the engagement, we've got 600 members now of that as of this morning. So where there's a whole host of kind of conversations that happen around it, information that's shared off the back of that. There's also kind of one-to-one meetups and kind of group meetups that now are kind of over 50 people that are attending to talk about it. And to your point, in terms of hearing therefore what employees want, kind of one of the tangible actions that's come off the back of that, as I think Louise was alluding to in the chat as well, was that we've now got a menopause specialist as part of our employee assistance, kind of private healthcare, which has come through as well. And that's kind of built from the ground up as people want this and they want it to happen, and therefore this is a really powerful move. But therefore, I just thought it's important to touch on, you know, some other practical examples of people will be engaged in the conversation if you give them the forum to have the conversation. So I think part of this is kind of employers thinking outside the box, right? And business thinking outside the box. It's just give a forum to have the conversation. I think it will naturally start to take off, in, you know, more than you might first think.
Absolutely. Just before I come to you, Sally, another statistic. Health and Her did a survey of 1,000 women. This next statistic will shock you. 0.6% of those women felt comfortable to talk to their manager. We've got some work to do. And that is because of stigma, that is because of fear, that is because of all the sorts of things. That is shocking. So I'll say it again, 0.6%. And that's this year, you know, that's literally last year's data. We need to be mindful, okay? We might put these things in place, but we need to actually test to see what the uptake is. We need to see how we're performing. We need to see what's working. So this isn't a throw a load of money at it. This is about really investing in the culture of your organisation, because you stand to gain a lot. You have a reputation for being a menopause friendly organisation. You have a reputation for championing women. You attract talent. This can only be a force for good. So we've got a low baseline. Let's see what we can do. So Sally, coming to you to finish off.
My point was, and it's probably covered in what everyone said, but the catalyst is it has to come from the top. Because, you know, you've got to have the buy-in from the top, and they've got to promote this whole subject and be seen to behind it, even to actually lead some of it. And my example of talking to the board member is just one example. If the CEO had still been there, who was much more empathetic, it probably wouldn't have happened, but it's got to be driven from the top in the whole culture. And not just about policy, but that's another subject on the next bit.
Well done, preempting the next question, Sally. Love it. So yeah, absolutely, Sally. It's an everyone topic, not just for some or the few. It's for everyone, because
and no matter what size your company is, if it comes from the top, you've got a much better chance of it working.
Absolutely. And so for those small businesses and large businesses, this next question is for you. So thank you, panel, on fire with that question. We're coming to our third question. So the third question is an effective menopause policy. I made Sally laugh when I said this. Surely it's not just a fan on the desk. Now, thank you, Elaine, for fully disclosing about the fan thing. So we've got that out of the way. what do we think about this panel? You know, okay, what does good look like in an organization? You know, if I'm in your organization as a perimenopausal woman, what are you doing for me?
Mhm.
What anyone's thoughts on this?
So we've discussed this on, you know, for years now, and when we first started the conversation and thinking about it, we were like, why would you have a standalone menopause policy? You know, we don't have, you know, a standalone diabetes policy. We don't have any, you know, we have like reasonable adjustments. We have, you know, specific policies about other things, but nothing that would be like this specific criteria. However, we've gone full circle. We are now in the process of having a policy written, and we just wanted to review it. And the reason being was two reasons. I'm just looking at my other screen just so I can just make sure I get it right. One is that whilst, you know, it can be a long-term issue for somebody, so other people can just experience short-term problems with it, you know what I mean? So you can be like, some people might have like the symptoms really extreme for like less than a year, other like yourself, Amantha, you know, for much longer. And so that we need to have something that's there to support all ranges of people. And the second was around discrimination. But, you know, so we need to think about not just disability, but gender and age as well. So that's why it was just felt that it was much broader than a reasonable adjustments policy.
Absolutely. Can I add in, you know, you've come to expect this, I'm going to add in some more detail for you. So because people are asking, well, why is it, you know, because actually surely there are other conditions like diabetes and cardiovascular disease that would warrant, you know, a special case. But actually I'm reading something directly here. It says, whilst employers have a moral and business case to support employees through the menopause, there are two provisions within law, employment law, that relate to menopause: the Equality Act of 2010 and the Health and Safety at Work Act of 1974. Basically, menopause is not specifically protected under the Equality Act, but case law has actually demonstrated that menopausal symptoms can be accepted as a disability in an employment tribunal. And there was only a case last week where a lady got a payout of £20,000 because of it. I mean, health and safety, you know, there must be ensure there's appropriate health and safety checks and risk assessments carried out. To just point that even further, I've got my notes here somewhere that says to me about the figures. Employers have a duty of care, but this is what we're going to come down to. The nuts and bolts of it is employment tribunals are increasing. In 2018, there were 5. In 2019, there were 6. And in 2020, there were 16. In 2021, there were 20. So it's coming. And so we need to be able to at least demonstrate that we are paying attention, we're making those reasonable adjustments, and that we're actually providing supports for people. So what do we think about that? Anyone else, you know, in terms of the policy and the question around, you know, what is it about a menopause policy? Any other thoughts? What makes an effective one? Anyone else on the panel? Sally?
I'm not sure about the effectiveness of policies. I'm devil's advocate. I don't think it is about a policy. You know how strongly I feel about it. This is actually about doing stuff.
Yeah, tell us
you
more.
know, the policy, a 14-page policy. Now, as managers, they don't read it. When they've been educated, and then the culture of the company changes from the top, then you can put a policy in place, maybe a couple of pages. I don't believe this should be driven by a policy, but that's devil's advocate.
I would agree. Sorry, just jumped in there. Sorry. I don't think it's about a policy in itself. You know, it needs to be, like we talked about earlier, a much wider cultural issue. But I think the policy can support and help people. I think we do need a policy in work.
Yeah, and there is some room, maybe like Andrew was saying, you know, it gives people that security, possibly those boundaries. That actually a bit like knowing about if you were providing support for a pregnant lady, that actually you'd know what you needed to do, when you needed to do it. Were you competent? And confidence. I think confidence comes into this massively, and probably what a policy or a guidance document will give you is that confidence. So actually for a lot of organisations that I'm working with, I don't advise going straight in with a menopause policy, because again, it might be a policy that's totally unreflective of your employees. So how about we start with a guidance which we can attach to any sorts of other documents that are available for health and safety, that we can make those reasonable adjustments, but actually let your people know that this is something you want to do collaboratively. You want to have menopause discussion groups, you want to have that connection and collaboration, and that some way down the line you will need that, because you may or may not know another stat for you here. So there is now the task force. There's also a change in legislation coming for women's health. The women's health strategy is underway, and it's talking about looking after women throughout their whole life course. So actually, there does need to be some reflection of that. And there is a very, very clear communication coming from government that workplace culture has a very, very big part to contribute in that. So maybe a guidance document would just make everyone else feel more reassured about what they need to do. Who had their hand up next? Sharon, did you? Andrew? Who was it?
Yeah, I didn't have any.
Sharon.
No, it's okay, because I was just, Elaine and Sally highlighted exactly what I wanted to say.
Okay,
So
brilliant. Thank you, Sharon. Coming to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, no, I just wanted to re-emphasize the guidance point, because I think that's where we are, right? But it might depend slightly, I guess, on the maturity and size of organisations slightly as well, because we have quite extensive, employee in the workplace health policies anyway. So it's quite easy to then, put on, make the menopause part of that as well. Whereas I think potentially with slightly smaller organisations, if those are less well established, policy could be more helpful. I think the whole point around this is breaking down the barriers to conversations, isn't it? So with us, in our workplace, we put guidance documents out to line managers. We've put and guidance documents out to kind of employees as well on, this is where we stand. This is acceptable. This is not acceptable. And, coming back to actually a point that, Sally made earlier around tone at the top, right? Our chairman has spoken about this as well. We employ 22,000 people, so that's quite a a powerful message to send out. But I think there's no right answer to this. Would be my sense. Some organisations might be better suited to a policy, some might be better suited to guidance, and it's just going to depend on maturity of wider policy within the organisation, which I think will inform that. So Amantha, I think coming back to your point, it's what does your employment base want? What do your employees want? If they want a policy is a way of making people feel empowered, that would probably be the right thing to do, I would guess. I'm no expert in this, but if that's what they want, and we want to make this move, then that's a great thing. If actually the ground up from the view from the organisation is probably don't need a policy, guys, but we would like some guidance out there, that might be the better move to do. So I think it's more about listening to your employees.
Absolutely. Coming to you, Sharon.
I would just like to say I kind of agree where Andrew's coming from there, because if you're going to avoid like any legal action, I guess you do need to have that. But totally on Sally's point, you kind of need to set the culture before you really set the policy, because people need to know what they're talking about. They need to be able to have that understanding, and I think that's probably the key part here, is people educating themselves and understanding. Sorry, you can hear my dog snoring in the background.
Exactly, Sharon. And it is a top-down, bottom-up approach, isn't it? It's not, people aren't having had this thing done to them. They are a part of that solution. And so it is really important. And certainly remember, 0.6% of women will speak to their manager about it. We've got the awareness piece to do first. We're not even possibly ready to get into, lock, stock and barrel in terms of the guidance, because it will just become something in a drawer that's never looked at, and then becomes a stick to sort of beat people with, metaphorically, and that's not great. So we definitely need to start with that awareness. So let's backtrack a little bit then. So if we say that in terms of the menopause, actually the policy, it's not just a fan on a desk. what does good look like then on a daily basis? If we collectively think about some of the symptoms that we might have, let's talk about flooding. Let's talk about flooding at work, shall we? I did a video with a lady who was an executive who was undiagnosed. She actually went from being perimenopausal to postmenopausal and osteoporotic. Her bones were crumbling and she had no diagnosis. She stood up to do a presentation in a meeting. She's an incredibly brave lady. She stood up to present to her senior directors, and she had a show of blood. It literally had leaked through her suit, it had gone onto the chair, and she just left. How could we support someone like that? How could we support someone like that? What could we do in something like that, because it happens? Sharon?
Well, just like what we were talking about earlier, Amantha, before we came live, normalise it. Because, you know, I've had a similar situation where, you know, I've been in the car, I've been stuck in the car, and I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm in the car, work's literally there. I didn't feel I was able to call the premises that I work in. Certainly didn't feel able to talk to my male client in his 50s, even though I have a really good relationship with him. It's not because I didn't think he'd respond well. I was just really embarrassed. And it's like, well, what do you do? And I think exactly what you said, it's normalizing it, just like you would with any mental health conversation, like we would have done many years ago, really, about pregnancy even. The more we can normalize it and make it, it just happens. It's no different from, you know, if someone had a nosebleed, what would you do? It's, you know, it shouldn't really be any different, but unfortunately, it still is, and fortunately to things like this, it's changing, but it normalised. Definitely.
Absolutely. And I've just noticed someone put in the chat, how fantastic is this? In all their first aid kits, they have spare disposable pants. It's those quick wins that we need for people. David's come on. David, have you got anything in the chat that's popping up?
Well, we've had a really exciting chat. Loads of questions. Thank you, everyone. Unlike Sharon's dog, everyone's awake. Perhaps if you don't mind me kind of bringing a couple of questions in, because I feel like this represents a lot of the comments, and I'm going to pull on Shandeep and also Tessa McEwen's question. So I'm going to ask two questions, but they're really the same thing. So first one is, Shandeep, how do we ensure that menopause doesn't impact career progression? Many women probably fear that open and honest conversation, thinking it could affect promotions. And then from Tessa, brain fog, anxiety, depression, and extreme fatigue are such common symptoms. How do we protect women from discrimination in recruitment, promotion? As we share how tough it can be, is there a risk of more discrimination?
Absolutely. So can we open that up? I mean, can take almost both of those together. Anyone got any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's this, if you can relate that again to the mental health side of things, can't you? So many people still feel discriminated against. If you know, I'm a real advocate for being your whole self and being able to acknowledge and talk about conditions that people might be living with, whether that be mental or physical or hormonal, whatever it is. And surely all workplaces should be looking at what that person can do, not what they can't do, maybe sometimes. And I think if they change their perception of things, that's when we can start to see some more positive improvements, is how I would look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be a panelist for a minute, if that's okay, David. Basically, it starts with changing the narrative around menopause, isn't it? If you think about it, we've come at it from quite a negative stance, haven't we? We're having to defend the topic of menopause. I'd like to stand here. I mean, would you know I was menopausal unless I told you? You know, I go on social media and I'm constantly telling people, because I see it as a time that was incredibly difficult for me, but the best time of my life as well. I've set up 2 businesses during that time because I've had amazing support. I've had people who believed in me, people who championed me, people who could see the potential in me despite all the difficulties. And because I'm happy to talk about it, as you might have guessed, it's made things better. So I think it's about, we need to talk about what does helping women give them and give you. What's the wins here? Because if we can change the narrative around what we stand to gain, we get this exceptional cohort of individuals who have all this strength, experience, legacy within them, that we need to protect that. We haven't seen the end of them. You know, the average woman will live to 83. Let's change the stories. Let's talk about the successes of what companies are doing to support women and how that then translates into the economy and their businesses. So anyone else come in on that? Because this is our moment. Yes, Sally.
I agree with you. I was going to say the main thing is to normalise the menopause. And absolutely, we need to start celebrating more that women do and achieve during this time. So that even balance would make such a difference, but normalising it is, to me, absolutely key. And your example is another great one. You know, it's not the end of it. Let's be proud of what we've done, and help companies when we have been through it and know what impact it is, to help them make it normalised. And it's his life, and we can't do anything to change it.
Can I ask
Andrew.
another question, Amanda? Oh, sorry.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
Go
okay,
ahead,
Andrew.
I think partly this also comes back to building. I see that building an inclusive workplace is a goal in and of itself, fundamentally, and I think that's changing in business at the moment, right? So I think that's the way that a lot of employers see it. So I think that, you know, there's a lot of conversation that we can have around what the women that we're losing from business can do to, you know, provide, you know, help companies, etc. But fundamentally, for me, it goes even deeper than that. It's wrong. It needs to stop, and it's not. And that's because fundamentally we should be having an inclusive workplace, and at the moment it's not. So I think that there are probably a lot of people that feel the same way. So the whole, you know, having a webcast like this. And the other things that we can do, you know, within the workplace starts that conversation. And I think that, as with anything, you know, in life, the more people take a stand against something, the more likely you are to make a difference.
Absolutely. And can we have more women at the top talking about the menopause? Elaine?
I was just going to say there's something about people noticing as well, you know. So if you're a manager and you notice somebody in your team that something's changing, it's like back to that first conversations that we were having today, is just pick up that conversation with them, you know, because if somebody is feeling like anxious and depressed, or, you know, there's all kinds of things going on, that's sleeping and feeling that sense of shame, and it's easier to, you know, might feel easier just to leave work rather than, you know, like raise that. So it's just being sensitive to your team and noticing those changes. You know, so you sort of think, like, how do we keep somebody in work? You know, we really value you. You know, all of those type of sort of value-based issues.
Absolutely. And just to clarify, it's not because we're women that we're keeping them in their jobs. It's because they are competent and skilled and brilliant at what they do. It's not just because we are women. David, was there another question?
Two thoughts and one question. Fiona brought up the word compassion in the chat, and I'd like to add another word to that, which is trust. You know, compassion and trust as we attempt to build our cultures. Without those two qualities, we won't get anywhere with any of these issues. Lisa Lloyd, who we know well, said how to change a culture from the top down. Leaders need to demonstrate and consciously plan culture development. It doesn't just happen. And I wonder whether anybody on our panel has, or even you, Amanda, has some evidence of this. Fiona asked a question: has anyone able to measure the difference between women going through a year of work with menopause with the support of the organization versus without support? Is there any evidence, any case studies, anything like that? Over to you, Amanda.
There is no data currently, and that's why I'm volunteering with an organisation called Menopause X. They're a group of data passionate people, and what they're doing is they're actually working out the cost of menopause to business. So basically working out the cost of it. We've just done a 1,000-person survey. We're collecting data sets from all sorts of industries, and it's coming. It's going to be part of the Davina McCall second documentary. which is coming out in May. I mean, and that's something else to talk about. The fact that we're seeing celebrities on social media, you know, that is raising the profile, and for good reason. So no, there isn't currently, the figure I gave you of 30,000 for losing a woman from business is conservative, and that was done in 2014. So no, we need that data, and I think that's where we're going with this. We need the numbers, but we already know from the numbers that I've just presented to you today, there is an issue.
Thanks, Samantha. I think we are within a minute. Is there any last minute questions? Any last minute points?
One point, sorry.
It's okay, Sally.
Yeah, I just want a really good point came up, one of many. It's been a brilliant session. Thank you, everyone, including all of our people who are with us today. Is if the message and again, an advocate, a female, senior female, it does seem to normalise it more, which is a really sad thing to say, but it does. So if a strong senior female says, actually, guys, I've had this and this is normal, I think that would also make a big difference.
Definitely. It's that show of solidarity, and it's oh, it's you as well then.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Sally. Great point.
Just finally then, our in our Berkshire Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust, it's the Deputy CEO's male who's championed this. So he's really been vocal and active and supportive since day one.
Absolutely. David, can I just say, I've just seen what is probably the best comment in the chat to typify. You've probably seen it too. Someone's just said this is by far the best menopause webinar they've attended. So I think that's high praise indeed. High praise indeed for the panel. Thank you for your part in this. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Samantha and Sally, Andrew, Elaine, Sharon, and John Waring in the background. You know, we've got so many experts in our audience. But I'm the person who kind of looks at who's registering, and I really appreciate all the engagement on the chat. And I want to let you know that even though we haven't been able to answer all of your questions and go into detail, the fact that you've joined us, we really appreciate. There will be a resource pack coming out to everyone who's joined the webinar today, kindly put together by Amantha. There will also be a guest list. So if you do want to reach out, because of GDPR, there won't be email addresses on there, but there'll be names, organizations on there. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Amantha and the panel for just, you know, buoying me along in this journey. I am learning, and I find it incredibly powerful to be able to be with you all. And a special thanks to Andrew for being our male on the panel, which I know, you know, it's not easy as we try and normalize everything, isn't it? So thank you all for joining us. We will be in touch post webinar with resource pack and guest list, and we hope you'll join us on our next one.
And thank you, David, very much, and the Chamber of Commerce for giving us this opportunity to present on a subject that we're all really, really passionate about. So thank you as well.
Thanks, Sally.
And thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you, everyone.